My aunt accidentally contacted me while venting about me to the family. I overheard her say, "He's just a pathetic ATM who thinks money makes him worth something." I remained silent, then terminated every payment I'd been making. 4 days later, they were flooding my phone yelling, "I, 32M, never thought a pocket dial would change everything, but here we are." The call came in Tuesday evening while I was reviewing contracts in my home office. My aunt's name flashed on the screen, which wasn't unusual. She called every few weeks, usually when she needed something. I answered expecting the familiar routine of pleasantries followed by a financial request. Instead, I heard her voice clearly, but she wasn't talking to me. She was in the middle of what sounded like a heated family discussion. My finger hovered over the hang-up button, but something made me pause. She was talking about me. My aunt's voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought she was being clever. She told whoever was listening that I was pathetic, just an ATM who thought money made me worth something. She laughed as she said it, that sharp laugh that always made my skin crawl. She continued, explaining how easy it was to manipulate me into paying for things. All they had to do was mention family loyalty or how much they needed help, and I'd open my wallet like a trained dog. My stomach dropped as other voices joined in. My uncle chimed in with his own observations about my desperate need for approval. My cousin added her thoughts about how I was so lonely and pathetic that I'd pay anything just to feel included. They dissected my character like vultures picking at roadkill, each taking turns to explain exactly how they'd learned to extract money from me over the years. The conversation had clearly been going on for a while before the accidental call. They discussed specific instances where they'd asked for money, laughing about the stories they'd invented to get it. My aunt mentioned the time she said her car needed repairs, and I'd sent $2,000 within hours. My uncle brought up the family vacation I'd funded entirely because they'd made me feel guilty about having more money than everyone else. What hurt most wasn't just the cruel words, but the casual nature of the conversation. This wasn't anger or frustration speaking. This was their genuine opinion of me, discussed with the same tone they might use to talk about the weather. I was nothing more than a resource to them, something to be managed and exploited. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes, listening to them plan future approaches for getting money from me. They discussed upcoming holidays and family events where they could apply pressure. My aunt suggested they should coordinate their requests better to maximize what they could extract. My uncle proposed they start asking for larger amounts since I'd proven I was good for it. The call ended when someone noticed my aunt's phone was connected. She quickly hung up, probably thinking it had been an accidental dial that nobody had answered. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call ended. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a cold clarity that was settling over me. Everything made sense now. Every family gathering where I'd felt slightly out of place, every conversation that had seemed to steer toward my financial situation, every request that had come with just the right amount of emotional manipulation. I thought I was being generous. I thought I was helping family members who were struggling. I thought my success was something I could share with people I cared about. Instead, I'd been funding my own humiliation. That night, I made a list of every payment I'd been making to family members. The numbers were staggering. Monthly payments to my aunt for her mortgage, regular transfers to my uncle for his business expenses, college tuition for my cousin, car payments for another cousin, emergency funds that had become routine, medical bills, vacation costs, home repairs, debt consolidation loans. Over the past 5 years, I'd given or loaned my extended family over $300,000. Most of the loans had never been repaid, and I'd never pressed the issue because family was supposed to help family. I spent the rest of the night going through my accounts and setting up the cancellations. Every automatic transfer, every scheduled payment, every standing arrangement was terminated. I changed my banking passwords and set up new security protocols to make sure nobody could access my accounts without my explicit permission. Wednesday morning, I called my financial advisor and had him help me restructure my accounts to prevent any unauthorized access. I also had him help me draft formal loan documents for any outstanding debts, complete with payment schedules and interest rates. If my family wanted to treat this as a business relationship, then we'd make it official. By Thursday, I'd sent certified letters to everyone who owed me money, formally requesting repayment schedules and outlining the legal implications of defaulting on their debts. The letters were polite but firm, exactly the kind of correspondence they'd receive from any legitimate creditor. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. Friday afternoon, my phone started ringing. My aunt called first. Her voice panicked as she asked why her mortgage payment had been rejected. I told her calmly that I'd discontinued all financial support to family members effective immediately. She demanded to know why, and I simply said I'd decided to restructure my financial priorities. She hung up on me. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing constantly. Text messages, voicemails, missed calls from numbers I recognized, and some I didn't. My uncle called twice before I answered. He was furious, demanding to know what kind of game I was playing. His business payment hadn't gone through, and he had vendors waiting for checks. I reminded him that his business expenses were his responsibility, not mine. He accused me of trying to destroy the family. I found that ironic. My cousin called crying, saying she couldn't afford her tuition payment and would have to drop out of school. I suggested she apply for student loans like everyone else. She sobbed that I was being cruel and heartless, that family was supposed to stick together. I agreed that family should stick together, but I'd learned that apparently didn't apply to me. The weekend brought a flood of angry messages. I was called selfish, ungrateful, vindictive, and petty. Multiple family members accused me of using money to control people, which was particularly rich considering what I'd overheard. They said I was punishing everyone for some imagined slight, that I was being dramatic and immature. Nobody mentioned the phone call. Nobody acknowledged what they'd said about me. They were all operating under the assumption that I'd made this decision arbitrarily, that I was having some kind of emotional breakdown or power trip. I almost wished one of them would bring it up so I could address it directly, but their silence told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sorry for what they'd said. They were sorry they'd gotten caught. Update 1. Monday morning brought a new development. My aunt showed up at my office unannounced. Security called to ask if I wanted to see her, and I decided to get this over with. She came in with tears in her eyes and a story about how desperate she was, how she'd lose her house if I didn't help her. She talked about our relationship when I was younger, how she'd always been there for me, how family was supposed to forgive and support each other. I listened patiently until she finished. Then I told her I knew about the phone call. I described exactly what I'd heard, word for word. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in the conversation, she was genuinely speechless. She tried to backtrack, claiming it wasn't what it sounded like, that she'd been frustrated and said things she didn't mean. I asked her which part wasn't what it sounded like, calling me pathetic, comparing me to an ATM, or laughing about how easy I was to manipulate. She couldn't answer. I told her that I'd spent years trying to be a good family member, contributing to everyone's welfare because I thought that's what successful people did for their families. I'd been raised to believe that when you had the ability to help, you should help. But I learned that there was a difference between helping family and being exploited by people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. She left my office in tears, but not before telling me that I was making a huge mistake, that I'd regret destroying my relationships with the family over my wounded pride. I told her that the relationships had been destroyed long before I found out about them. I'd just been the last one to know. That evening, I got a call from my mother. Word had spread through the family, and she wanted to understand what was happening. I explained everything, including the phone call and what I'd heard. My mother was quiet for a long time after I finished. She told me she was disappointed in her sister and the rest of the family, but she also asked if I was sure I wanted to cut everyone off completely. She understood my anger, but she worried I was making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. I appreciated her concern, but I explained that this wasn't about temporary emotions. This was about fundamental respect and how people viewed me as a person. I'd been happy to help family members who were struggling, but I wouldn't continue funding people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. My mother said she understood, and she supported whatever decision I made. She was the only family member who didn't ask me to reconsider or try to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. Update 2. 2 weeks later, the real consequences started showing. My uncle's business was struggling because he'd been counting on my monthly payments to cover his overhead. My aunt was frantically trying to refinance her house or find alternative funding for her mortgage. My cousin had to take out emergency student loans at much higher interest rates than what I'd been providing. The family was in crisis mode, and somehow, it was all my fault. I received a group text from my aunt that included most of the extended family. She laid out their financial situations and explained how my sudden withdrawal of support was affecting everyone. She painted a picture of a family in chaos because one person had decided to be selfish and vindictive. The message ended with a plea for everyone to help convince me to reconsider. The responses were exactly what I expected. Multiple family members chimed in with their opinions about my character and my obligations to the family. They accused me of using money as a weapon, of holding grudges, of forgetting where I came from. Several people said they'd never ask me for money again, which was interesting since most of them had never asked in the first place. They'd simply assumed it would be provided. I replied to the group text with a simple message. I acknowledged that my decision was causing difficulty for some family members, but I reminded them that their financial situations were ultimately their responsibility. I offered to help anyone create a budget or find resources for financial assistance, but I would no longer be providing direct financial support. The response was swift and brutal. I was called every name in the book. People accused me of abandoning the family, of thinking I was better than everyone else, of using my money to hurt people who had trusted me. Multiple family members said they never wanted to see me again, which was probably the most honest thing any of them had said in years. My cousin sent me a private message asking if we could meet for coffee. She was the only family member who hadn't attacked me personally, and I was curious about what she wanted to say. We met the next day at a neutral location. She started by apologizing for her part in the conversation I'd overheard. She admitted that she'd gotten caught up in the group mentality and said things she regretted. She also acknowledged that the family had become too dependent on my financial support and that it wasn't fair to me. I appreciated her honesty, but I told her that the damage was done. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust and respect, and those things couldn't be rebuilt with an apology. She asked if there was anything she could do to repair our relationship, and I told her that we could start over as equals, but the old dynamic was gone forever. She seemed to accept that, and we parted on civil terms. She was the only family member who seemed to understand that this wasn't about money or control. It was about being treated like a human being instead of a financial resource. Update 3. 3 months have passed since I cut off financial support to my family. The initial drama has died down, mostly because everyone has had to focus on solving their own problems instead of trying to guilt me into solving them. My aunt ended up losing her house. She couldn't qualify for a mortgage on her own, and the payment schedule I'd offered for her existing debt wasn't something she could manage. She had to move in with her daughter, which created tension in that household as well. She still blames me for her situation, telling anyone who will listen that I destroyed her life over a misunderstanding. My uncle's business survived, but barely. He had to take out high-interest loans to cover the gap left by my payments, and he's had to significantly scale back his operations. He's managed to avoid bankruptcy, but his profit margins are much smaller now. He's also stopped speaking to me entirely, which is honestly a relief. My cousin managed to stay in school by taking out additional loans and picking up a part-time job. Her grades have suffered slightly, but she's adapting to the reality of being financially responsible for herself. She's one of the few family members who still maintains contact with me, though our relationship is much more distant than it used to be. The most interesting development has been discovering who my real allies were in this situation. My mother remained supportive throughout the entire ordeal, never once suggesting that I should reconsider my decision. My brother-in-law, who had never asked me for money, reached out to express his understanding of my position. A few family friends who knew the situation told me privately that they thought I'd made the right choice. I also learned that I wasn't the only family member who had been exploited. My brother-in-law told me that several relatives had approached him for money over the years, always with sob stories about temporary hardships that needed immediate financial intervention. He'd always declined, which apparently earned him a reputation as selfish and unhelpful. Now I understood why he'd never seemed comfortable at family gatherings. The family dynamic has shifted permanently. There are people who still speak to me, people who refuse to acknowledge my existence, and people who are waiting to see how everything settles before choosing sides. Holiday gatherings are awkward affairs where my presence creates obvious tension, so I've started declining most invitations. Some people might think I overreacted, that I should have addressed the issue directly instead of cutting everyone off. But I disagree. The phone call wasn't an isolated incident of frustration or poor judgment. It was a window into how these people really viewed me, and once I saw that clearly, there was no going back. I don't regret my decision. For the first time in years, I'm not worried about managing other people's financial crises or wondering if someone's friendship is genuine or transactional. My bank account is healthier, my stress levels are lower, and I'm building relationships with people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. The money I was spending on family members is now going toward investments, charitable donations to organizations I believe in, and experiences that bring me genuine joy. I've traveled more in the past 3 months than I had in the previous 2 years, and I've started pursuing hobbies I'd neglected while managing everyone else's financial emergencies. My family taught me an important lesson about boundaries and self-respect. They just didn't intend to teach it the way they did. Sometimes the most valuable education comes from the people who hurt you the most, and sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from relationships that diminish your worth. I'm building a new life based on mutual respect and genuine connections. It's smaller than my old life, but it's infinitely more authentic. And for the first time in years, when my phone rings, I'm not wondering what financial crisis I'm about to be asked to solve. That alone is worth more than all the money I spent trying to buy love from people who were never capable of giving it.